Like in nature, if you look at systems in nature, they don't grow linearly, they always grow exponentially, then you have boom and bust cycles. I think every time or anytime you start dabbling into Bitcoin, you think, okay, I'm too late. 3 years ago, there was very little banks were interested in offering digital assets. Now, if you talk to other banks, no matter whether they like it or not, all of them say, well, it's here to stay, so we have to do it. Retail is not even on the table yet. And so the current price action and everything that's going on in the space, I think it's almost exclusively driven through institutional funds and institutional investors. At the same time, I think it's also natural and good that the institutions come to the game, because if you really want to live in the world, or if you assume that Bitcoin will make it, those guys, the big guys, also have to be part of it. And it's a great question. Honestly, if I really zoom out, I think in 10 years, I could imagine a world where...
Hey guys, welcome back to another show. Today I'm here with the Chief of Staff at Signum. Pascal, how are you doing today?
Great, thanks a lot for having me on.
It's a pleasure. I'm super excited about this chat. Super interesting story you have, and I know you've been in Dubai for a few years, so we're going to definitely talk about it. But before we do that and dive into it, I wanted to ask you, how did you discover Bitcoin? What was your journey into it?
Yeah, great question. I think it was like everyone, right? It was a long journey of ignoring and thinking I know better, until you finally get humbled enough and stumble upon something that you cannot ignore anymore. More concretely, I think the first time I heard about Bitcoin was 2013. And I remember I posted on Facebook, is it too late to invest? Bitcoin was probably at $300. And then, yeah, I left it at that. I got busy with my studies, and then afterwards started working and was busy at work, like so many people, busy earning money without thinking, okay, what is actually money? The next time, in 2017, I had a touch point. I used to live in Dubai at that time. A colleague of mine at work, he bought himself an insane sports car. Everyone was obviously asking where he got the money from. He was like, yeah, Bitcoin. And then I thought, yeah, this crypto stuff, it's a casino. It's nothing serious. It kind of confirmed my very negative attitude towards Bitcoin. And then, yeah, it took me a couple of more years until I got humble enough to discover it. That was then basically during COVID, right? Mainly I was personally really concerned about inflation. And so I thought, well, there's this gold thingy, there's also this digital gold thingy. So I put money a little bit into both. And then one just, doesn't do anything. And the other thing just went up a lot. And then that sparked my curiosity. And
some people have used the COVID time, I call it, to do absolutely nothing and play video games and get paid by their employee. Well, other people like you and me, we've studied certain topics. I have friends, they learn how to play guitar, learn to play instruments. With other friends, they just wanted to do absolutely nothing. So that was an interesting one. I don't think we'll see another one in our lifetime again. I'm happy to know that you've chosen to go down to the rabbit hole, as we say. Signum, okay, so we all know it's been founded Swiss and Singaporean in 2017. Can you tell us a little bit about what you guys do?
Yes, sure. So, I mean, in a nutshell, Signum is the world's first digital asset banking group, as we proudly, I would say, label ourselves. As you said, we have this Swiss and Singaporean heritage. So we're a born global company since the outset. The idea originally, I would say, was really to enable institutional investors and private accredited investors to gain exposure to digital assets in a regulated and secure way. Back in the time, in 2017, 2018, I think most companies could not have invested in Bitcoin or crypto because there were just no regulated custodians. And so that was really the origin, I think. So this very strong thought about marrying, let's say, TradFi and the future of finance, and really doing that in a very clearly regulated path. And then since then, I mean, yeah, we grew quite a bit. So now today, Signum, we're like 250 team members. We have still Singapore and Switzerland as our main hubs. So in Switzerland, we have a full banking license. In Singapore, we do have a CMS and MPIL. So other licenses are almost like a bank, not a bank. And then we do have registrations in other jurisdictions like Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, and also the UAE.
From your perspective, I'm really curious here. How have you seen the average investor changing perception in crypto in general?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, look, we are fortunate that we work with institutional investors, family offices, funds, hedge funds, and others that are, I would say, like, it's like the smart money, right? Those who are curious, who were very early into let's say, the digital asset space. We do not directly serve retail clients, but we do have a bank-to-bank business where we allow other banks basically to enable their end clients to work or to invest in digital assets. And so through that lens, we see a lot how the adoption is progressing, right? I mean, 2 years ago, there was very little banks were interested in offering digital assets. Now, if you talk to other banks, no matter whether they like it or not, all of them say, well, it's here to stay, so we have to do it. And so in that sense, we clearly see this shift towards more adoption, be it on the retail side, but then obviously also on the institutional investor side, where right now I think that's actually where currently, especially in this market environment, that's where the music is really playing, right? I feel like retail is not even on the table yet. And so the current price action and everything that's going on in the space, I think it's almost exclusively driven through institutional funds and institutional investors.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I had Matt Hogan, CIO for Bitwise, on my podcast a couple of times, and he was saying, even though the majority of the volume on the ETF is coming from quote unquote retail, it's not the retail that we are looking for, right? Those people, they will FOMO into Google and put Bitcoin into it. And I agree with you. It doesn't even feel like anybody cares. Besides you, me, and a bunch of other people celebrating the $100,000 for Bitcoin, the average person, I don't even know if they care.
Yeah, I think so too. And in a way, it's unfortunate because I really love about Bitcoin, at the core, that it was such an individual freedom, or still is, right? A tool for individual freedom. And so it's great to see that this is really an asset that grew not top down, but really bottom up. And so obviously now with the institutions coming in, you could ask yourself, okay, is this over? I think yes and no. I do think that we're still so early, right? So I still try to encourage everyone I know who is interested in learning about Bitcoin. I'm happy to tell them and share the joy and whatever I like about Bitcoin. At the same time, I think it's also natural and good that the institutions come to the game, because if you really want to live in the world, or if you assume that Bitcoin will make it, then those guys, the big guys, also have to be part of it, right?
And maybe it's because institutions and corporations, they understand what money is, whether the average retailer has no idea what money is and they think is in the bank and is a currency. And I was one of them, by the way, so no judgment here whatsoever. I just started my journey into Bitcoin as a speculative asset to make, quote, money, then later on figuring out that Bitcoin is money. So it's like a full circle.
Yeah,
so
honestly, I think it's the same. I think Bitcoin so often turns your worldview upside down, right? For me, it was exactly the same. I thought, okay, living in Switzerland, my unit of account was the Swiss franc. So I thought, okay, in COVID, we have inflation, so I want to hedge, right? And then suddenly at some point, I realized, okay, I then finally got what people meant with one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. First, I just thought, okay, whatever what that means. But then at some point, I clicked. And since then, I think it really changed the way I view the world. And I think, I hope that for many, many people, it will happen the same. It's just, it's a long journey. You have to really, it's a great thing about, you have to put in the work. So you have to do your own proof of work to get there. You cannot force convince people. I don't think that works very well. So everyone has to come to the water themselves at the end of the day.
Having money, it's a path, right? It's a journey. It's a simple calculation between how much money you make every month and how much money you spend every month. So anyone at any level can have quote unquote money. And then you should start taking a portion of your paycheck and invest it. It doesn't have to be necessarily Bitcoin, even though I do believe, no financial advice, it's the best asset ever made. But you can go into other areas. You can go into gold, you can go into S&P, or even real estate for it matters.
Yeah, it's true. I think, honestly, as you said, right, it's about, I think every time or anytime you start dabbling into Bitcoin, you think, okay, I'm too late, right? And then you can just give up from the onset and not even try. Or you can say, okay, yes, I am where I am today. And, the best day to invest is always, or invest to save actually, was always yesterday. But the best day is probably today. And then you start DCAing, and over time you will see, I truly believe it does change your life, because it's not only, what you save, it's also how you think about your life, and it rearranges your priorities, it lowers your time preference. It also helps you to see where you want to allocate your own time. And at the end of the day, Bitcoin is scarce, yes, but your own lifetime is as scarce, if not more scarce than Bitcoin. You don't know how much time you have left. Bitcoin, the issuance schedule, but with your own life, it could just end at some point, right? So then you start realizing, and that for me, I kind of learned to appreciate scarcity through Bitcoin, and now I apply that in other areas in my life. I realized, okay, time with my family, that's really what matters at the end of the day. And so I became much more selective in how I spend my time and my attention and focus.
If you are someone who has no clue about how money works and you have not read the books, right? There is plenty out there. Bitcoin Standard is one of them, and the big print. There is so many options out there, and maybe one day I'll do a video with all the books.
I would add Broken Money to that one, and The Price of Tomorrow. Those are like...
100%. I think Lynn then killed it with Broken Money. It's actually one of my top three for sure. That's a
Yeah.
good read. But hey, you can be someone who's quote unquote a bit more lazy and just follow the money, right? So look at what all the big corporations are doing, where they are investing, and you can skip all the learning if you want and just follow where the big people are putting their money. I mean, why do you think institutions are investing so aggressively into Bitcoin?
At the end of the day, it's the same as with us, right? I mean, the institutions, they feel the pressure from fiat that loses more and more money. They have to chase better, better, and higher returns. And then if you look at it, as you said, if you just look at the plain facts, I mean, Bitcoin is the best performing asset over the last, I guess, 14 years. There's this famous, I think, the BlackRock chart right from the IBIT where it shows Bitcoin versus other asset classes, yearly performances. It's also super volatile, of course. But, at some point, you cannot deny the facts anymore. And then the same happens in other types of pools of capital, right? If you're a bond investor and you invest in, let's say, US bonds, and if they are risky bonds, non-rated bonds, then at some point you will come across certain companies that issue bonds, and then, they outperform, you buy them. If you look into why, you realize, oh, actually, it's a bond that is somehow linked to Bitcoin and the company with strategy, right? Stuff like that. It's just happening. And I think the overperformance will just draw more and more capital towards it, because capital always goes to the place where it has the best returns, so to say.
Do you think they are going to change the so-called Fourier cycles? Because now this massive inflow into ETFs and institutional, besides all those ETFs, right, on the table, we've seen companies like Strategy, 21, Nakamoto, we have Bukele. There's a lot of buying pressure. The amount of coin mined is not going to be enough to sustain the buying pressure. So do you think we could break free from the Fourier cycles?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm really disputing it with myself as well, because, on the one hand, yes, things are different because, as you said, you have these massive institutional buyers. You have the Bitcoin treasury companies, and those guys, they're not traders. They buy, they never sell, right? That just gobbles up a lot of the supply, and it will never go back into the market. I think ETFs, you could argue as well, like those from retirement accounts, they buy and they don't sell. So that really definitely changes the structural dynamics in the market. It reduces a lot the available supply. I think recently our research team said that 30% dwindling of available supply, so that could then it could be this gradually then suddenly type of moment. On the other hand, I think it always pays out if you listen to people who were longer in this space, because this time is different is something that has been said every time. And I do think that even going forward, the 4-year cycles, I mean, that the supply of newly minted Bitcoins is halving will still induce a supply shock, so to say, into the available supply. And I do think that we will still have like exuberance. So, it's like in nature. If you look at systems in nature, they don't grow linearly. They always grow exponentially. Then you have boom and bust cycles. So I do think that we will still have volatility. And then it's obviously difficult to say whether this will correspond to the 4-year cycles, like Rational Root and the great chart that he does, if this will hold true going forward. I'm really curious, and I wouldn't know. I think there's factors that say yes and others that say maybe not.
Plenty of models, like there is Plan B, there is Sina from 21 First Capital, there is Giovanni, the
Yes.
power law, there's the quantile law. There is so many people predicting with mathematics what could happen next. And I agree with you. I don't think it's about 4 years, 5 years. It's about greed and fear, and those, they move every single market. I am expecting a correction at some point, not even near the 90% or 70% we've seen before.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, as you said, right now, I mean, if right now in Twitter, there's a lot about this double top. Did it already happen? So I think that's just really extrapolating past kind of chart patterns into the current situation. And I think it's completely wrong and off, right? Because if you look what's on the macro landscape, I mean, as you said, you have so much institutional demand for Bitcoin. Retail isn't even here yet, right? Once they come, it will go even more nuts. And then you have nation states that might start. I mean, the US, they announced the strategic Bitcoin reserve. They haven't announced it, how they want to accumulate more Bitcoin in a budget neutral fashion. And meanwhile, you have like just every week a new Bitcoin treasury company popping up, and you might have then central banks lowering rates because they see the economy is not going the way they want. So I think all this is just really pointing towards the upper right end of the chart, and not towards we're nearing a bear market. But let's see what happens. It's always an interesting ride, and it always comes out differently than we think, because it's always the max pain scenario that Bitcoin will choose, I guess.
Even just Trump alone, with the people he's appointing to, he's putting pressure on Powell to print, like you said. So they're going to turn the printer on at some point. And there is also a correlation between the M2 money supply and Bitcoin. There is so much happening. I think stablecoin are going to be probably one of my top 3 reasons why we could go and maybe break out free from this cycle.
Stablecoins, they will drive a lot of demand for US dollars and ultimately also US treasuries, right? And actually the US administration knows that and they acknowledge that. That's why the Genius Act, the Stablecoin Act, is right now being voted upon, I think, this week, right? That's why the proliferation of at least USD denominated stablecoins, I think, we will for sure see that. And I think it's a good thing because it allows people, as you mentioned, millions of people who live in places where they have a money or a currency that devalues so fast to have another currency they can save in. And I hope that, when they see this other currency, maybe at some point they see that there's even another currency called Bitcoin where they could save the long term in. And, so I see it also as a mini Trojan horse for many, many millions of people around the world to discover Bitcoin and get a life raft that they so desperately need.
Are you worried at all? Like sometimes I have a guest on and they're saying, oh, those institutions, those kind of different buying institutionals and corporations are getting into the space, ETFs and all sorts of stuff, Sailors, Nakamoto 21, like we said earlier, they could potentially change the Bitcoin per se because it goes against the ethos of, going against bank and all that kind of stuff. Are you worried about those companies entering the space, or it's something that it doesn't bother you at all?
Yeah, look, I think the ethos of Bitcoin is actually, it's a protocol, everyone can use it. I think I am also Bitcoin maxi at heart, so I'm very in fan of self-custody for individuals, right? I think everyone should try out at least this journey. But then I think it's also should be everyone's freedom to decide to what extent they want to have their coins in self-custody or go with a regulated custodian. And I think there's clear need and use cases for regulated custodians, especially if you talk in the institutional space. And I think that's sometimes what Bitcoin maxis might miss out on, right? That the ideal for individuals of being a self-custody, living on a self-custody basis, that might be true for you, but it might not be true for, let's say, your grandparents or kids that are still too young, or institutions that, where you would rather have them have their coins with other regulated institutions. So I do think there's space for everyone. But yes, everyone on the individual level should be at least dabbling and be familiar with and be free to, especially to self-custody. But overall, I don't think the institutions are bad. I think that's just the natural progression that happens, right? If you think that we want to live in a world where, what we call the hyper-Bitcoinization, then it would be, in my eyes, impossible that this happens without the institutions and even, sovereigns being part of that.
How can you have a network which is open, transparent, and decentralized, but only available for certain people? But then
for those I like, and the other ones no.
Then it becomes a centralized network.
That is basically political to say, yeah, these people should be able to use it and those not. And I think that's a great thing about Bitcoin. It's money for enemies. That's what it means if it's trustless, because you certainly don't trust your enemies.
Exactly. And I would even argue we would never have reached $2 trillion without certain key players, right? They are entering the space. So again, you can't have both things. There is a thing we say in Italian, you can't have the barrel of wine full and the wife drunk. You have to choose. If you want Bitcoin to go over $100,000 to go towards the $1 million, which I think we will see in our lifetime, then you have to be open to the fact that in the space, we will have different type of players.
I agree. And, absolutely. I think as well, at the end of the day, Bitcoin is really, this is great meme about Bitcoin being a Trojan horse. And that's so true. Like these institutions, they buy Bitcoin because they see it as a good investment, right? They don't do it because they believe in, free money and the separation of money and the government and sovereign individuals and all the idealistic things that we as Bitcoin maxis on the individual level might subscribe to. But at the end of the day, having or using honest money will also make those institutions more honest, right? And at the end of the day, if a government uses Bitcoin in their national reserves and it becomes such a big part of their reserves that actually you could argue their fiat currency is kind of pegged to Bitcoin, that will force the government to be spending much more consciously and to not debase the money. And then I really believe that we will have less forever wars, we will have less bad policy decisions, we will have more justice, basically. And so in that sense, I think it's good that Bitcoin gets gobbled up by these institutions, because it does change also the way that these institutions work, in my eyes.
Like Andy said, be the change you want to see on this planet or on the world. If you don't like institutional player, if you don't like the fact that sailors don't want to give a proof of reserve, just buy in self-custody. The new head of the SEC was on TV a couple of days ago saying that he's pro self-custody.
Also, I think in the first executive order of the Trump administration, they basically really enshrined the right for self-custody for the software developers as well, right? So that's super nice, because at the end of the day, this is really it's freedom. And if you follow Gigi, it's one of the main people or guys that I love in this space. He wrote this article saying that code is speech, and if you have freedom of speech, then you should also have freedom of coding. And so I think it's great that we see the world moving toward that place.
Those decisions, those people in charge, those people appointed. I mean, look at the Bitcoin conference in Vegas, 35,000 people. JD Vance was there. Things are changing, and Bitcoin is getting visible on the map. And if you now have a corporation who has a lot of cash on your balance sheet, you're probably going to think, hey, maybe I'll do just 1%, maybe 2%, and just park it there for a couple of cycles, 8, 10 years, and see what happens. And that's all we need, because that's how we get from 2 trillion where gold is, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so too. And even you could even take the stance that if you have zero exposure to Bitcoin, then you're basically shorting it, right? Because if you look at the whole assets, I think Bitcoin is like 0.022% of global assets, but that's more than zero, right? So if you're lower than that, then it basically means you're shorting Bitcoin. And the last 15 years showed that's probably not the side of the trade you should be on.
Where do you see the space going? I mean, are you expecting many more companies building on the lending, borrowing?
Yeah, I think so, absolutely. I mean, Bitcoin in my eyes is the pristine collateral, right? Because it's 24/7 tradable. It's super liquid. You have a global market for it. It's just not yet seen as that, because otherwise we probably would already be much higher with the Bitcoin price. People who have Bitcoin, or institutions who have Bitcoin, they want to, as you said, they want to put them to use, so to say. I think in the past we had very bad experiences with this Bitcoin yield, right? We had a lot of non-regulated players that went belly up. But at Signum, we see a clear demand for the lending business. So if you have a Bitcoin and you want to take a loan against your Bitcoin, and we also think that this will continue to go into other products. So there's people who float the idea of bit bonds for sovereigns or for corporations. There's people who float the idea of Bitcoin-backed real estate mortgages, which would make the Bitcoin, or basically the mortgage, safer for both the borrower and the lender. So I do think that this will come. It's just a question of time. And I'm, honestly really excited that at Signum we can be part of this in shaping and developing these new markets, and see that we incorporate Bitcoin into such financial products for the future.
Do you see some of your customers tampering into altcoins as well? Because, probably you and me are more towards kind of the Bitcoin corner.
Maybe I'm very liberal here as well, but I think you should be able to invest into whatever you want. Personally, I'm, of course, much more on the Bitcoin side. I guess my t-shirt probably shows it. I think I have nothing against altcoins. What I don't personally think is right is that you compare or put them in the same bucket, right? Because for me, I think it's clear that, and I think, I would even argue that this becomes very obvious for institutional investors as well, that you have Bitcoin, which is, digital capital. So it's a pristine, I would say, capital, so to say, for the 21st century. Then you have stablecoins as a second big bucket, which have a tremendous use case, because basically people still have a fiat unit of account, but stablecoins have all the advantages of the blockchain, of the digital rails, so to say. And so I think you see a lot of proliferation in that space. We talked about it before, especially for those people who live in places where you have more debasement. And then a third category is basically then the cryptos. And honestly, from when I look at it in the financial industry, I do think that blockchain does make sense for tokenized assets. If you look at how an exchange works today with securities, where you have a custodian, then you have all these kind of handovers in between, it's very, very inefficient. And so having basically tokenized assets to shares, that does make a lot of sense. And then there might be other coins that are, I see those more like a tech VC startup. And so for me, that's more like you want to be in the tech space, you want to invest in maybe promising technology, then go ahead and do it. It's just for me important to really see that this is a different thing from Bitcoin. So I also think that Bitcoin is not crypto and crypto is not Bitcoin. But everyone has their right to do whatever they want.
I am also for a free market. So if there is someone who wants to buy Ethereum, Cardano, Chainlink, Pepe, whatever, they should be able to do so. We will never be able to take away the gambling component from people. People play the lottery, they go to the casino, they see this market, they see a lot of cryptocurrencies into it. They see Bitcoin and they think, oh, it's too expensive, right? Because they don't know they can buy Satoshis, but they will eventually learn. And I think any other crypto, it is a good way to market Bitcoin. It's a good way of marketing, right? Because whenever you go into any altcoins, you will soon realize that Bitcoin is the play. So you'll have to go through it, right? And I am trying to explain it every single time I record the video, but you can take the horse to the lake, but you cannot make the horse drink the water. So, and by the way, I also had my moment in 2017. I bought Ethereum, I bought Cardano, I bought many other tokens, and I learned my lessons, right? So I think it's a school, it's a learning process, but also is a market. And I don't even think they compete, like you said, it's potatoes and bananas, two different things.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think as well, right? And if you look at it from, okay, what is going to be the dominant capital in the future? I think that's very clear. This Bitcoin, there is no second best, like the famous saying goes. And so if you talk about digital capital, then, it's very clear. And then if you talk about, other blockchain-based innovations, you can have whatever you want, and maybe they fly, maybe not. I wish them well. I put my eggs into that basket that I know very much.
Now we are into a Bitcoin season. The dominance is going higher, and we have not seen Ethereum performing as everybody was expecting to perform. But I am expecting at some point, whenever Bitcoin goes bananas, some people are going to take profit into the altcoin market. So we will have eventually, I don't know when, some sort of I don't know if I can call it altcoin season, but I like to call it rotation. Some people are going to speculate on other assets to do well. Difficult to say which one is going to be, but historically speaking, there has been always a bunch of coins that for a small amount of time, they manage to outperform Bitcoin. And then we go into the bear market, and then Bitcoin is your safe word, safe bet, because everything else is going to destroy itself versus Bitcoin. And if you chart any altcoin versus Bitcoin, it's a bloodbath out there, right? If you take dollars off the equation, it's really bad. So I don't know if you agree with me, but I think we will see a rotation of capital at some point.
Yeah, I mean, the chart you probably refer to is from Billy Wu. That one, I think from 2014 or so until 17, where you see clearly what the trend is. I do think as well that we will have an alt season as well, because it's just very not natural, right? If there's more attention in the Bitcoin space, then these coins might also piggy bank or profit of it. So I wouldn't be surprised as well if this...
Yeah, it's all that greed, man. We will never be able to take it off people.
But that's even in the Bitcoin space, I think, right? People get greedy, they get over leveraged, then they start, lending out, getting yield, getting return there, go, overly long. So yeah, that the fear and greed, I think it's just very human at the end of the day. So we'll probably always see it in the market as well.
Where do you see Bitcoin going in the next 10 years? It doesn't have to be a price necessarily, because I don't want to put pressure on you, but in terms of adoption, in terms of do you see, for example, Apple or Google playing with this asset in 10 years from now?
It's a great question. Honestly, if I really zoom out, I think in 10 years, I could imagine a world where Bitcoin will be much more ubiquitous, like everywhere, basically, it's basically just a backbone. So could be part of several of sovereign reserves. It could be part of, insurers that have long-term investment horizons. It would be part of mortgages. It would be, backing different other financial assets and products. Yeah, I'm quite excited to see, how it will go there. Probably not in a straight path. We might also have situations like threats to Bitcoin, like discussions on the protocol level, on a regulatory nation state level. I don't think that, everything is yet known, but I do definitely think that there is only, in my eyes, one logical conclusion where Bitcoin will go, and it's going to be really everywhere. And I think, yeah, that's basically the logical future.
The direction is up, and we will correct, of course, along the way. Even though I am not entirely sure the US is going to actually buy the 1 million Bitcoin in 5 years, what we can see and what we will see and what we've seen already, states saying, hey, like Texas, we like it. We're going to put some Bitcoin on our balance sheet. Some other states have said no. So it's going to be a very much mixed bag of states deciding to do certain decision. If you look where we are going, we started with a bunch of super sovereign individuals with their own keys and their own wallets, kind of buying pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin. And now you have the president, launching meme coins, which, there is a
Like
lot of
what?
stuff in between.
Yes, no, for sure. I think it's an amazing journey, and I think as well, like there's just no way around it. I think even by now you could argue that so many people have heard about Bitcoin. Most people probably still have a very negative view or connotation of Bitcoin, but this is changing with every single day, and it's logical, right? The more that fiat currencies debase, the more people will look for a solution, and over time, more and more people will find that this solution that is called Bitcoin might actually work, and that's just the way I think that it will become reality, and that this new system that Jeff Booth, I think, very elegantly also describes will come into fruition.
I completely agree. And guys, of course, as always, I will link in the description, Pascal details. And thanks, man. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Really appreciate having you.
Thank you, Maurizio. It was really a pleasure talking to you as well.
Thank you so much, guys, for watching. We'll see you on the next one.